Perfect. Okay, everybody, we're going to make a start tonight. You can't hear. Okay. Yeah, we're going to make a start tonight. We're going to make a start tonight because it's 7:50, and we have I don't know if any of you got a chance to listen to the interview this morning that was given on Clare FM. Okay, yeah, she did a super interview this morning at Clare FM. Terrific interview. And it's podcasted, so you can listen to it at another time when you go home or another day or whatever. Anyway, we are delighted to have Betty O'Neill here. Betty is from Australia. She's a Sydney-based author and an educator with a lively curiosity and a passion for family history, as you will see this evening. She's a lecturer in creative intelligence at the University of Technology in Sydney, and a past director of the board of the Society of Australian Genealogists. Very, very good group. She's appeared on Who Do You Think You Are? And she's been interviewed by many, including Clare FM today, ABC Conversations, and The Other Side of Absence, which is her debut novel, her memoir, The Other Side of Absence, Discovering My Father's Secrets, which she's going to discuss tonight. Betty has also been over here for the last month or so. She's been teaching in UG. She'll be teaching in UL next week. And you were teaching somewhere else, you said, weren't you? Or no, maybe I have it wrong. And then she's off to the States, where she's going to be doing some teaching in Arizona. So she's a very busy lady, and we're delighted to have her here this evening. So thank you very much, Betty.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you very
welcome.
much. Well, I'm really delighted to be here, to have been invited along this evening to talk with you about some of my research. So I wrote this book, which some of you heard about this morning on the radio, apparently. This is about my father, my Polish father. So I have a Polish side, my father's side, and I have an Irish side, hence the name O'Neill. So I have my mother's name. Anybody Polish? I know these two have just come back from Poland, but nobody Polish. Okay, so I don't have to worry about my pronunciation of Polish. I don't speak any Polish, so other than to say dzień dobry, which is hello, and do widzenia, see you later. So that's the extent of it. Sorry? Oh yeah, absolutely. So Jane's asked me to share some of my research with you, but I thought I might just start with how I got started on this, because this is my first foray into any family history at all. And it really started on a writing course. Anybody done any writing workshops or courses? Or yes, a couple. So it started on day one of this workshop. We had this exercise to do, and it was the first time I met, and keep writing for 20 minutes. So I wrote, the first time I met my father, I was 19, which is true. So, and then we were asked to add to that every day of this, 2-week-long course. And I realised I just didn't know anything about him. I didn't have anything to add. So that really made me very curious. So I then started to think about, well, who was this man who was my father, and what led him to make the decisions that he made? So that was really the catalyst for my research and to try and find out. So by this stage, I'm in my 50s, many years since I had seen him, since I was 19. And really, it was a bit like being a detective on a cold case in some ways, because my father, I knew he would be dead. He was born in 1909. He was 20 years older than my mother. So, and I knew that he wouldn't still be alive. This was in 2010, this workshop that I did. So I knew he wouldn't still be alive. And so I thought, well, I don't even know where to start. So I had 2 photos and 3 documents. That was what I began with. And I didn't know really anything more about him. So maybe just a little bit of background to how we got there. So what did I know before I actually began? So this is my mother back in 1952, 53. She went to England from Australia. So she was an Australian, and she went to England on a working holiday, well before they were popular or people, did that sort of thing. So she was quite brave and adventurous, I think. And she met my father. This is the day that they got married. I was born. That's my father in a park with me as a baby. So that's one of the photos that I have had of him. We lived in England for, I think I was, this is me, 6 months old on the ship coming back from England. So Mum and I on the ship coming from England back to Australia. So you can see how young she is. She's like 23, 24. So that was cute, me as a baby. And then the other thing, so I knew that much. My father's visa had been delayed, so Mum and I went on our own and he was to follow, and we weren't really quite sure what the delay was about, but he didn't come until July the following year. So we came in November 54 and he came the following year. The other things that I knew were that he had been born in Lublin in the east of Poland, that he'd been in Auschwitz concentration camp. He'd also been in Gusen concentration camp in Austria. And then after the war, so he was in a concentration camp for 4 years and survived. And when the Americans liberated him, he couldn't go back to Poland. So he'd been in the resistance. And all of the resistance fighters who did return to Poland were either shot or they were sent to the Russian gulags or they were imprisoned. So the Russians who were then handed Poland, which was a bit strange given that that was the whole reason that World War II started, to preserve the democracy of Poland, so that the Russians then took over and it became a communist country. So he couldn't return. So he was exiled from Poland. So he went to England. He came through Italy and ended up in England, working for the Barter Shoe Company. Anybody heard of Barter Shoes? Did anybody? No, not so popular in Ireland, but I had Barter school shoes. But anyway, he ended up working at the Barter Shoe Company, and he and Mum, Barter, B-A-T-A, yeah. So, and he and Mum met there and on from there. So that's sort of what I knew. So I did a bit of a timeline. I'm not going to go through this in lots of detail, but perhaps you can see, tripping over, when he was born, he was arrested in 1941 as a resistance fighter, sent to Auschwitz, then to another camp, liberated by the Americans, married my mother, Nora O'Neill. I was born, and then we returned to England, and then my father followed, but he was only with us for a week or so, and Mum woke up one morning and he was gone. So he disappeared. And she didn't know where he'd gone. She didn't hear anything from him. So that was 1955. So in 1961, she decided to apply for a divorce on the grounds of desertion, because he had just disappeared. And then she found that he was a bigamist. He had a wife, Helena, and a daughter, Janina, in Poland, who were still both alive. So their marriage was annulled, so rather than a divorce, because he was still married, so he couldn't marry, and they were still alive in Poland. So I was only 6 when all of that happened, so I didn't know anything about it until sort of years later. But then in 1974, when I was 19, he wrote a letter to Mum and I and asked if he could meet us and meet me. So I met him when I was 19, which is, back to the workshop, and, the first time I met my father, I was 19. So I wonder if I could have some water, Jane. Would that be all right? Thanks. So I met him when I was 19, and I knew him just for, maybe close to a year. He showed me a photo of my half-sister, Janina, so that's his other daughter, and told me that she had 2 sons. And then in 1974, he returned to Poland. And I didn't find out until later, but he actually went to live with back to live with his first wife and his other daughter. They hadn't seen him for 33 years, not since he was arrested in the middle of the night by the Gestapo and sent to Auschwitz. So, well, he was in Lublin jail for a little while and then on to Auschwitz. So in October that year, he returned to Poland, and Mum and I never saw him or heard from him again. So thank you so much. So this writing workshop that I did in 2010, many, many, many years later, I sort of thought, I hadn't even thought about him for all of those years. So every now and then I did, and I would ask Mum, but she wasn't very forthcoming with any information. So the workshop really stirred things up for me, and I thought, I've got to find out who this man was. So I started making some inquiries in 2010, but I didn't really get very far because I don't speak Polish. So I know lots of you will have looked at your own family histories, and hopefully they're in a language that you can understand in terms of records and so on. That was not the case for me. So I started some serious research in 2013. So it took me a while to, I was looking for things and not finding anything, gave up for a bit, and then I came back to it. And then I actually found a Polish woman in Australia who helped people find their Polish families or helped them research their family histories. So she was a historian, but she also helped people find their families. So without her, none of this would have happened because I just wouldn't have got very far at all. Oh, we're working. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so this takes us up to 2013, and I'd planned to go to Poland at the end of the year. So as Jane said, I teach at the University of Technology. So we have our summer break over Christmas, unusual for you, I know, but that's when we have our summer break, so that's what I'd planned to do. So in March, I went into the Society of Australian Genealogy and did some research there and, used Ancestry and, these are things that you're probably familiar with, and found that my father was one of 8 children. I knew nothing about him. And I thought, oh, he had brothers and sisters. I didn't even think about that, but, he did. But I couldn't find a death certificate for him, even though I knew he must be dead. And I couldn't find any trace of this daughter whose photo I had seen or her 2 sons. So that was a bit of a mystery. Christina, I just told you about, who then started to help me. And in August, I found his death certificate and found that he died in 1996. So he went to Poland in 1974 because he thought he was dying and he wanted to die in his homeland and he wanted to be buried there. So that was why I guess to be reunited with his family as well. But he lived for another 22 years. I don't know whether his first wife was expecting that when she welcomed him back, but anyway, he did. So Helena was his spouse, and she was on the death certificate. And I thought, oh, I wonder if she was alive when he went back. I didn't know any of this. And I looked to see who the death had been notified by, and this was Zdzisław Zalewski, who I found and actually ended up meeting him. I thought he might have been, Janina's husband, but he wasn't. He was just a good friend. But anyway, I got to meet him, which was great. Then I found that my father was buried in the Roman Catholic cemetery in Lipova Street in Lublin. So that was good to know, he died and where he was buried, and that his wife had died in 2003. So she was alive when he went back to Poland, and she lived, for quite a few years after him. And on it said that she was buried with her husband. And he was her husband, yes. And then I got this email from Christina, because she'd helped me find all of these bits of information. And it was a brace yourself email. So it was great because she would be researching overnight. So every morning I'd reach for my phone and I'd think, oh, what's she found tonight? What she found while I've been asleep. So this was one of those emails. And so she'd been looking for, any other relatives and Janina in particular and her 2 sons. So this brace yourself was that Janina had died 2 years beforehand in 2011, and that she had no children. So my father had lied about a lot of things, and this was another thing that he had lied about. Who knows why? I have no idea. So I was quite distraught when, I found she's dead, no children, no other family. So I was then just thinking, should I still go? What's the point? There's no family. Why would I bother? There's nothing to find out. But there was something pulling me to keep going, and so I did go. And then I started looking at a whole range of different things. So these are some of the research methodologies that you'll be familiar with. I'm sure a number of you have done these sort of things yourselves. So I set up some interviews in Poland. So one was with Zdzisław, the man who'd notified of my father's death, and other people, and in Austria, because that was where the other camp was. The vital records, I couldn't read them, so because they're all in Polish. So I then employed a Polish genealogist to help me, and he was just amazing. And this is back in 2013. So, you know, a lot of the records weren't available online like they are now. So he had to go to various parishes, you know, and talk to the parish priest. And one letter, you know, one email that he sent me said, I've contacted the parish priest, but he's away until after Easter, so I won't be able to go for another 3 months or whatever. I think, okay, right, we just, you know, take our time with these things. And I went to all of these archives as well, thinking that there might be records about my father, because what I was really trying to do, knowing that he was dead, was to piece together his life and try to understand, as I said, you know, why he'd made the decisions that he'd made. So I went to the Auschwitz, I'll show you some photos later, and the Gusen Archive, Ministry of Interior in Vienna, and they had oral histories that I listened to as well, you know, testimonies from other prisoners who'd been in those camps who had similar experiences as my father. So, you know, we're able to share that as well. The Polish Underground Movement Study Trust in London, the Polish Institute in London, Zbowid, which is the Office for War Veterans and Repressed Persons in Warsaw, and the Dachau trial transcript. So he wasn't in Dachau, but there were prisoners who had been in the camps he'd been, who were in Dachau and who gave testimony. So, and also a family archive, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later. The genealogist that I worked with, he was able to trace back to 1711, which was amazing. So this is my family back, you know, all of those years. So this took years for him to do this. So it was over quite a long period of time. But, you know, he went through all of these census and records and found that my father's family were saddlers, but because, you know, there wasn't a great deal of work for saddlers, then, you know, they also had to work as farm labourers as well. So at least I knew, you know, what they had done. Oh, yes, can't visit him until after Easter, the priest. This is Zdzisław, who I met just after I arrived in Poland. So I'd organised to have a translator, an interpreter with me, a young university student called Chris, who came with me because Zdzisław doesn't speak English, I don't speak Polish. So it's really interesting to have a conversation with somebody while you're waiting for it to be interpreted, and then for him to speak, and then I have to wait for Chris to tell me what he said. So it's a bit of a slow process. But I spent the first couple of days with him, which when I got there, and he knew my father. He'd worked with him, and he remembered when he had returned to Poland as well. So this was amazing to actually find somebody who knew my father, the only person in the whole world, you know, that was still alive. So that he was a lovely man. He's since passed away, but so generous and just, you know, a lovely person to talk to. Yes, of course.
His surname is the same. Was it just pure coincidence?
No, a different surname. So Jagilski is my father's name. This is Zabielski. Yeah, just a little.
Christoph's name was different. Is that right?
So this Christoph?
Yes.
Yes. So this is the Christoph. This is my back many generations to who he was born in 1711. Okay. Yeah. So that's sort of back through the generations. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah, that's all right. There's a lot of strange names to get your head around. Yeah, you can imagine how I was when I got there. Yes. So this is my father's original personal record card from Auschwitz. And one thing about the Germans, they were meticulous in their record keeping. So on the back of this card, it tells me exactly where he was moved to, when he was moved to a different camp, and even as far as when he was in hospital. And who would think you'd put a prisoner of war in hospital? It didn't happen very often, but he happened to go into the hospital. And then he was also, when the war ended, he was in the potato kitchen. So I think that tells us something about how he survived. He would have been warm, he would have had food, and, you know, how he got there is a bit of a mystery. And there are lots of stories about him as, you know, being guilty of sabotage while he was in the concentration camps, and records of, you know, people who've talked about that experience for him and things that he did and got beaten for and so on, which is how he ended up in hospital. So this was amazing to actually, you know, go and put on a pair of white gloves and be given this card. And the archivist wasn't keen to give it to me at all at the beginning. And she said, oh, we don't let anybody touch them. And I said, nobody else in the world will ever come here again looking for this record. I will be the only person ever to want to touch it and to want to hold it. And so anyway, eventually she was convinced and went and got the card out of the archive, and I had my gloves and I was able to, you know, actually hold it and read and take some photos, which I know it was just a very moving experience to be able to do that. So that was quite amazing. So that was archives, and there were other archives as well. And books. One of the things that I did when I went to Auschwitz was I booked a tour. So there was like a 2-day guided tour. And because I went in, I think I was there in January, nobody else was on the tour. So it was me and the tour guide. It was brilliant. So, you know, I was able to ask so many questions, and she was just a really lovely young woman. And she said, I'll tell you what, we'll go to the bookshop. And she said, there are a couple of books in there that I think will be really useful and handy. And this is one of them. So this is about the transports, the Polish transports to Auschwitz from Lublin. So this book actually from 1940 to 44, and this book actually documented and had photos of all of those men who were transported from Lublin to Auschwitz. And so you can see here Antoni Jagilski. Oh, my Polish has gone a bit stale, but his number was 23522, and he was accused of conspiracy against the regime, and I can't remember what the rest of it is, but anyway, that's what he was arrested for, was his part in the resistance movement. So there, I thought, isn't that amazing? You know, here's his name in a book. Somebody's actually recorded it. So that was pretty special. One of the other sources was this workplace newspaper. So I said that when he went to England, he was working at the Bata Shoe Company. And so in May 1955, so by this stage, Mum and I are in Australia. We went November 54. So then there's this article in the Bata Record. I mean, that was amazing to find that as well. So it says, Tony Jagilski on the packing table met an attractive Australian girl when she came to England for the coronation of Elizabeth II. That wasn't exactly why she went, but anyway, that was what he said. In due course, he married her. She went home and he continued working at East Tilbury. Now, after 8 years' service here, he's going to join her at a town in New South Wales. That was true. In his native Poland, Tony was a waterworks engineer. He spent 4 years in the German concentration camp, served in a Polish army unit under British command, coming to East Tilbury with several of his compatriots after the war. He will again change his job in Australia, for he will work on the business side of a farm. I have no idea what that means or what he had in mind, but that wasn't what happened. But anyway, and he says, I shall be sorry to leave, he said, but I'm lonely without my wife. Well, I don't know which wife he was talking about at that stage, but I think it was my mother, but, you know, anyway. So, you know, these are interesting things that you can find, and sometimes you're just so lucky. And because, you know, none of these newspapers at this stage, when I was looking, are online. It's not like, well, in Australia we have Trove, which is an amazing resource that you can just, you know, put people's names in and up come all of these newspaper articles, which is fabulous. But we sat there going through these records, you know, and these newspapers. And Barbara, one of the women who work in the resource centre there, she found it. And it was like, oh, look what I found. It was so exciting. It was just amazing to find that. So I get a bit excited about these things. Workplace records are another thing. So you can see here, this is Antoni Jagilski. He was born, so I know that's him, on the 20th of July 1909. Previous employer, own business. He never really had a business, but anyway, that's what's in the record. But I can see, that he started working there in October in 1947. So that timeline that I put up at the beginning, I'm starting to fill in some of the gaps. Lots of gaps that I had. So I was starting to fill in some of those bits of information. These were the archival, where the archival records were in London. So the Polish Underground Movement Study Trust and the Polish Institute, and they each had records about my father. So these files, and again, they're in Polish. So I had to wait for them to be translated. But I got, amazing information about his experience during the war, some of his injuries, some of the things that had happened to him in that time. So, these files were invaluable for me in terms of understanding the sorts of things that he had been through. So the other things were fellow prisoner testimonies, which I mentioned before, the Dachau trial transcripts. The Bradford Museums and Galleries in 2010 did an oral history, which was amazing because it talked about lots of Polish people's experiences through the war in DP camps and after, similar places where my father had been. And the medical reports. So I was fortunate enough to have this really thick medical report. My father had, when he was in Australia, he had applied for compensation from the German government for war injuries, and so I had to provide all of this medical data, so about his physical injuries, psychological injuries, and the damage that he had endured during that time. So they were very detailed, and they were good. Cemeteries, I'm sure any of you looking for family history have been to cemeteries looking for, gravestones and so on. So this is my father's gravestone in Lublin, and you see all the flowers around. I was there at the beginning of November, All Saints Day. So, when you go at that time of the year, it's like Samhain here, I suppose, in some ways, but it's, All Souls. And so every cemetery is just full of flowers and red candles and, they look quite amazing. So here we've got my father, Anthony, his wife, Helena. So they're buried together, and this says that he was... he was imprisoned in the Hitler's Auschwitz, which is Auschwitz, and Mauthausen-Gusen, and when he died in 96. This is Janina, his other daughter. So she married Ludwig Lorek. Ludwig died before she did, and so she was left on her own after everybody else had died. And down the bottom here is Leszek Jagilski. So he was the son of my father and his first wife, who died when he was just a baby. So I'd found that record, and then to see it on the gravestone sort of just confirmed that. So, as a family historian, you're looking for, various bits of evidence, one that supports another, and hopefully you can find 3 bits that say, yes, I think that's accurate. So, that was good to actually find that. This is me in January digging the snow off my grandmother's grave. So the only record I have of my father's mother was that when she was buried in the cemetery. And so I went looking for the grave. It took me days to actually find it because the records aren't very clear. And as you can see, the pathways aren't exactly clearly defined. So even if you say it's row 15, plot number, whatever it wasn't easy to find. So there I am digging away, trying to see if I could find what was actually written on the gravestone. And this is at a time when my understanding was that there was no other family. So Janina had died 2 years beforehand, and nobody had claimed the estate. There had been one claim, but that had been rejected because it wasn't, family. So my understanding was that there is no other family. But when I kept digging on my grandmother's grave, on my great-grandmother's grave, there are fresh flowers. There are candles. So some human had been there and put them on there. So I was then left wondering who on earth, would have done this. and who is this person? And they're obviously a relative of some, I imagine they're a relative of some sort. So I was about to come back to Australia. So I didn't have time to do a lot of investigation, but what I asked my interpreter to do was to write a note about, my name's Betty O'Neill, my father is, Anthony Yagilski, I'm looking for any family members, these are contact details, if you read this, and so, just put that, and had it laminated because, it's snowing, so, otherwise it would have just disintegrated, and put it on the gravestone. So there was, see this little plaque up here, it sort of stood a bit higher, so I just, we attached it to that. This also, so this is Maria Yagilska, and also her other son. So Stanislav, he also died in Auschwitz. So he was shot in Auschwitz. So he and my father would have been there around about the same time. I don't know whether they knew each other, were in the same camp, but anyway, he was shot. So he's actually buried there as well. Well, it's a monument to him. We don't know whether his body is actually there. I don't think it is. So, so he was on that. So I was in the snow, just using my finger to trace around what's the date? What's this? Because you can't really read it very clearly. So anyway, so that was, we left the note. And you'll have to read the book to see if anybody read it. So the next thing I just wanted to talk about is, how are we going for time, Jane? Yeah? Yep. So I just wanted to talk about the domestic space as an archive. Because when I went to Poland in November that year, I knew that Janina had died. I had heard that the apartment that they had lived in, so my father went back to live with his other wife and his daughter, so the three of them lived in this little apartment, tiny space, and Ludwig, her husband, had died, so there's just the three of them. And I was hoping that I could get access to that apartment. Hopefully there would be some photos, maybe some documents, maybe some letters, and I actually ended up inheriting this apartment. So, which was quite strange. This is what it looked like when I walked in, and it had been locked up for 2 years because of this court case that had happened. And I was thinking, God, I hope somebody's emptied the fridge more than anything else. They had. So this is sort of a living area, but there were also 2 beds in this area. So it's 3 rooms in this apartment. So you walk in, and that's what you walk into. Straight ahead is this room with a bed here and a bed there. And then if you turn left and go down the corridor, straight ahead was the bathroom, and on the right was the kitchen. And there was another bed in the kitchen, which is where my father slept. So tiny space that they lived in. Yes, and so this is what the apartment looked like. And in that apartment, on the dressing table, I found this photo. So I remember looking at it and thinking, not really quite understanding what it was, but this is my father's identification photo the day he was taken to Auschwitz. So you can see down here on the bottom, it's got that he was a Pole. This is his number, 23522, KL, concentration lager, concentration camp, Auschwitz. And so he was 33 at the time, and yes, it was a bit of a shock. And then also, every single cupboard looked like this. I opened the door and things would just tumble out. So here I am thinking, what do I do with all of this? What would you have done? You what? Read it, okay. Carmel? You go through it? Yeah, well, I did. Page by page, envelope by envelope, and photograph albums. There was just so much in all of those cupboards. They were just all chock-a-block. I don't think they'd thrown out anything for 50 years. And amongst them were, does anybody remember these blue aerograms? Yeah. So, there's like 60 of these, I think. And they were in these little brown packets. And so, you know, the first one I opened, and I had to do everything very carefully. You know, these letters were there, and you can see this is addressed to Helena, his wife. Some were addressed to Janina and Ludwig. So this one is Janeska. So, and I thought these quotes from Australia, yes, to the Polish wife. And there are also some from England to the Polish wife, which meant what?
He missed her.
Well, he missed her, but also he's writing to his first wife while he's taking my mother out. Well, he married my mother while he had a child with my mother. So you can, sorry? Yes, I guess you could think of it that way. I was really upset though, because I just felt, you know, he's really betrayed my mother. And I thought, she was dead by this stage. But I just felt, you know, she'd just been really betrayed and lied to. She was very young, and he was 20 years older. So yeah, that was a big difference.
Yeah, but you can see that he was torn as well.
Do you think he was torn? I don't think so. Do you think?
He couldn't go back to his wife.
No, that's true. That's true.
Could she not convened him, you would think?
Yes, yes.
That would be the logical thing to do.
I don't know how easy it was to get out of Poland at that stage. So, you know, I think there were lots of difficulties, you know, that were in the way. And look, in the long run, I think I've come to the conclusion that he really just wanted to get as far away from Europe as he could. And in one of his letters, he writes that he, you know, has come to Australia to regain his health and his wealth, always with a plan to return to Poland. So not only were there letters, but there were dockets from this shipping company. So he sent back to his wife and his other daughter, he sent medicines. Janina was diabetic and had some other issues as well. He sent money. He sent knitting wool, you know, for them to knit. So he sent, you know, lots of things. He did nothing to support Mum and I. So, you know, there's this real dilemma that I have. You know, I really understand that it must have been so hard for him, not being able to go back to his own country, as you said. And also, you know, he was quite a sick man, psychologically. He wasn't, you know, and a damaged man, which you can really understand from all of those years in a concentration camp. So I have that compassion for him. But I also think, you know, well, what about Mum and I? You know, he just disappeared. And
He married the first wife before he was arrested. Like I'm just telling you.
Yes.
He married her before he was arrested.
That's right.
He was 33 that time, so it was before that.
That's right.
Where he came from, he married her.
That's right, yeah. So he was 20 when he married, and Helena was 19, and their daughter Janina was the same age as my mother.
Okay.
So she was born in 1930, like my mum. Yeah, so big difference between them.
But then he may not have been able to see, and he wasn't able to see, I would say, right until after he was liberated or whatever, and then he couldn't go back to Poland. So, like, it was, I'm not saying I'm not making excuses, but it was.
Sounds like it.
He was trying to understand.
It's kind of difficult to judge what happened in the 1950s by how we think today.
Exactly.
You know, or
Exactly.
even how we might have thought in the 1930s before the war and
Yeah.
the trauma that it brought.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, it's a prison, really, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah. Sorry? Absolutely. Yeah.
People are just kind of trying to do the best they could. I know, I
Yes.
think make the excuses for them too. That's not what I do with them. They're just trying to see it from the perspective.
Yes, and I could as well. And I think I said on the radio this morning, the interview, I was just talking about, you know, I've got this historian's hat on where I'm documenting all of this, you know, information. And then I've got my abandoned daughter's hat on. You know, what was he thinking? You know, what about us? You know, he did all of this for his other family. What about Mum and I? You know, it's really hard for my mum. She was a single mother. Sorry? That's true. You think I should be grateful, Declan? Oh, that's true. There are lots of ways of looking at these things. So, look, here I am, left with everything. and trying to sort things out. So I was quite meticulous in, you know, sorting out photos and dates of documents, and the letters, you know, I put them all in order, had them translated. And Chris, who was working with me as a translator and interpreter, you know, he'd come from uni. So I'd send him a message and say, you know, can you come this afternoon between, you know, yes, I'll come after my lectures are finished. And I'd have this pile of documents for him to have a look at, and he'd sort through them and tell me what they were. And he'd look, one day he looked at one and he said, washing machine instructions. Okay, don't need that one, so you know, off that went. So I had lots of stuff to go through. This is Chris, lovely Chris. He was such a fabulous support for me. He was wonderful. So no electricity. So the electricity had been disconnected. Luckily, the heating went through the whole building and was still working. So because it was in November when I arrived, it was freezing cold, and it was, you know, I was there November, December, January, and you know, it would be dark at 4 o'clock. Well, you know what it's like, you know, get light at 10 and dark at 4. So yeah, so it was interesting to be working by candlelight, really, not for anything other than, you know, that they had big corner windows which let some light in as well. So I guess just in terms of family history, you know, other information that we can get and that we can use is from, you know, photos. So these are photos from before the war. So this is my father with a friend walking down the street in Lublin, him in a park. This was a radio that I found, you know, that he talked about. His rosary beads, good Catholic or not. His hats, he always wore a hat. So when I met him in Sydney when I was 19, always wore a hat, always wore a suit and tie. So, you know, that sort of style of dress. And this is the photo that's actually on the front page of my book. So this is him in 1937, I think, yeah, walking down the street. So those street photographers, I really love this photo. You know, horse and cart here. And then I see this little man over here with his hat. I'm dying to know what's in that little suitcase he's carrying. Wouldn't you love to know what's in there? I would. So just, you know, street photographers, as they used to do, you know, all over the place. Certificates. This is I found his birth certificate, would you believe? So that's, you know, and again, it's in Polish, but it actually tells a whole story about these two men carrying my father to this village, the church in Nabroz, which was, well, fairly close to where he was born. But it tells this story of them taking him there, that both of them were farm labourers, that they didn't read or write, and you know, lots of other details. So it's not just a certificate with a date and, you know, so on. It sort of had more information than that. Trade tools were another thing. So Helena, his wife, she was a seamstress. She was a tailor. So there are all of these pattern books and magazines, scissors, little lace, you know, collars, boxes of buttons, all sorts of things that and patterns that she'd cut out of newspaper. So those things, the photos and letters. So, you know, various years from my father from 1955 when he first arrived in Australia. He sends this back to a souvenir for my beloved family. That's in 1961, just after their marriage was annulled, and so on. So, and lots of letters. Travel items, you know, so it's amazing where you can get information. So in this tiny apartment, you know, as I said, every cupboard was absolutely chock-a-block. And every time I opened one, I'd sort of groan and think, oh, no. You know. But anyway, I sort of disciplined myself to go and, you know, just go through it all meticulously. And then one morning, I'm walking down towards the kitchen, you know, bathroom's here, the kitchen's over here. And I looked up and there's this cupboard above the doorway. And I thought, oh, more. How can there be any more? So I found a ladder in the bathroom and I got up to this high, you know, cupboard. I opened up the door and all this dust just, you know, covered me. But also in there was this suitcase. And I remember this suitcase because this is the suitcase that my father took from Australia to Poland in 1974. My mother and I took him to the airport to make sure he actually got on the plane and that he went to Poland. And I remember that lime green suitcase. And, you know, it's got this Qantas sticker on it, Yagilski to Lublin, and the address. And then there was, inside the suitcase was this briefcase of his. And in this corner was a tiny, tiny little piece of white paper the size of a matchbox. And on that piece of paper, it's got my name, my address where I lived in Sydney, and on the back of it, it's got my phone number, and it's got the bus route that goes from the city to where I lived. That's the only bit of me that was anywhere to be seen. Nothing about my mother, and I have no idea how that piece of paper got there, or how long it had been there, why nobody else had ever seen it, why nobody had even thought about it. So it says, it's his writing. Yeah, and it says that Kingsford, you know, New South Wales, so, you know, somebody would know. Remains a mystery. So I sat and thought about that for quite some time.
Do you think he told his wife about, would you think
No.
You wouldn't think so?
No, so when I was talking to Giswava, I asked him, and he said never spoke about another family. He said there were rumours that there was another family, but never spoke about it, no. So, I mean, in the privacy of their own home, who knows? But, you know, I don't think so. So we're almost at the end here. So this is in 2015, I went to the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the camp, and there were some survivors of the camp. I met this man and lots of other men, and that's before I went grey. So, he didn't know my father. He didn't speak English either, but his family were there, and they were able to tell me some stories about what it had been like in that camp as well. These are my skilled helpers. So Chris, who was just amazing, and then Chris went off to China. He studied languages at university, and he got a job in Shanghai. So off he went, and Agnieszka took over. So they helped, both of them helped me over quite a time. So they're the things that helped me. And I guess my final tip in terms of family history is to try to take your time with these things, because it does take time. And I think, you know, and the cup of tea is there I think sometimes it's important to look after yourself. So whether that's a cup of tea or something stronger, whatever is needed. But I do think, you know, that self-care element is really important when you start to look at family history that can be disturbing, and you just really never know what you're going to turn up. You don't know what you will find out, and sometimes it can be quite disturbing. So I had a hard time with a lot of this, and had to put it aside for a while before I came back to write it up. Yeah, and the end result is the book. So there you are.
Thanks very much, Betty. It's really fascinating. I know it's not Irish genealogy, but it's so relevant to all of us, what you said about the domestic space and taking your time going through documents and the kinds of documents that you can find. So I just, it's very, very good. And hopefully now this book may come into the Ennis bookshop if anybody's interested, because it is a terrific read.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting book. Are there any questions? Larry?
The graves, I'm conscious of those that he gives out to me. Okay, the gravestone that took the first gravestone of your parents and then your grandmother, but the first gravestone, all the deaths were out of sequence. So
Yes.
your mother was on top, she died afterwards, and your father was underneath. And then at the left-hand side, you said their daughter was down at the bottom.
That's right.
So it would strike me that someone put up the gravestone after they all died.
Yes, I don't know who even organised the
Yeah, someone
gravestones, 'cause
organised that.
you know, it happened well before I got there.
Yeah, but was there no inscription on the side of the headstone like we have here in Ireland?
No instruction about.
No, who provided the
Oh
headstone?
no,
Okay.
there wasn't. No.
Okay. And the second thing, sorry.
Sorry, just one more.
Sorry, I've just two more. The second one was the will. You found your name at the bottom of the case. Was written. Do you know where the briefcase was?
That briefcase was,
Yeah.
the briefcase was in the lime green
Yeah,
suitcase.
and your name was at the corner.
Yes. So when I opened up the suitcase, it
Yeah.
just, that little piece of paper just fluttered out on the floor.
But his wife died after he. Surely she got a look at the will because you were left the property.
I wasn't left the property.
Sorry, that's
No,
that came across.
No, but I missed that little bit. So when my father died, there's still his first wife and daughter living in the apartment.
Yeah.
Then his wife dies, so then the daughter is left living in the apartment because her husband has died some years ago. So she's living in the apartment by herself. She died, no children, no will. And so the apartment was locked up for 2 years. So she died in 2011. I got there in 2013.
Yeah.
And before I left, I was told about this apartment and told to bring, all of my documents that proved who I was. So I brought all of that with me. And I was just hoping to get access. All I wanted to see, any photos or anything, but I actually inherited it because there's no other family.
Alterations. Okay.
Yeah, so no will, no.
Okay.
Giswaf, and he had a daughter, and she was a lawyer, so she helped me
The
enormously.
last question.
Next question.
If you were to guess,
If what?
if you were to guess,
Yes.
what has it cost you?
Oh, I could not tell you. 3 trips to Poland, the translator, the interpreter, the genealogist. I have no idea. Do you know how much an author makes from a book? Go on. No, I want you to tell me. How much does an author make from a book? $1. Yeah. The Airbnb for the apartment, yeah.
Sorry, this gentleman has a question. Do you want to ask your question?
Have you any idea why he left your mother and your family? Was he going for a job or something at the time?
I don't think that he actually had the ability to hold another relationship. I think he was.
But he went back to Poland. Had he a job?
Sorry, when he went back to Poland.
Yeah.
He was in his 70s when he went back to Poland.
Well, when he left Australia.
When he left Australia, that was in 1974. So he was born in 1909. So what's that make him? Yeah. So he was well past looking for work. And he got some compensation from the German government for his war injuries. And also, he went back to Poland quite a wealthy man comparatively, because he got the compensation. He was on an Australian pension because he'd worked while he was in Australia. And then when he went back to Poland, he got a war pension. So he financially, he did well. There's a question down the front here, Jane, before we... Yes.
Perfect, yep. Another question. Oh, I'm sorry. I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just to follow up on the last question, do you have confirmation or a marriage certificate and the date, just to see, did he possibly marry your mom because he got her pregnant, which would not be uncommon at that time?
No, he did get her pregnant. So they were married in December. I was born in May. So she was pregnant when they married.
Okay.
But he didn't have to marry her. I actually think that there was an intention to get her pregnant, to marry her, to be able to come to Australia.
Okay.
But I will never know that. But
Right.
that's what I think. Yeah.
Sorry. Just what I thought you did he leave Australia when he went to Australia with your mother and yourself in 1954 or 5 or 6, but then he left Australia to go back to Poland and
74.
But was he with you all the time then up to 74?
No, I didn't meet him till I was 19.
But he was still in Australia.
He was still in Australia, but we didn't know where he
just
was.
left okay,
And
sorry.
didn't hear from him. The only contact that we had with him was, well, I didn't, but my mother did in 1961 when she filed for a divorce on the grounds of desertion.
And there was contact at that stage, was there?
Well, they met in court, yes,
okay.
because it was more complicated than just, a normal divorce, because he was still married. And so they had to get, I actually found in some records in Sydney from the court, I found the transcript of the divorce proceedings, and in there was also a letter from Helena his first wife, saying when they were married, and the letters that he wrote back was saying, you know, you have to send me these documents. You know, I insist. You know, why are you wasting time? You know, so he was quite angry in a lot of the letters that he wrote to his first wife. I thought if I'd got a letter like that, I would have said, well, you know, fuck off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which raises the possibility that his reason for re-establishing, for the want of a better way, contact with Elena was for his own benefit. You know, that it was about getting his documentation and so on.
Yes.
It may not have been that, you know, she was the lady from start to finish. And the other question I have is, have you considered the possibility that when he abandoned you and your mother in Australia, that he may have established another relationship thereafter?
I've been asked that question many times, and I have no idea. And I have no interest in looking for anybody else. If they come and find me, I'm very happy to talk to them and tell them everything I know, but I'm not going looking anymore. No. But back to your first,
Yeah, my
sorry,
first,
the DNA test. Too late, Declan. You should have told me before.
and my first question was, did you get any feedback to the laminated message that you left on the grave?
Let's do one more question there.
Just a quick question. Aside from the questions you've been asked already, on your mother's side, have you done much research on the O'Neills?
Well, that's why I'm here. And that's why I came last year, because this book is now finished, really. So now I'm writing about my mother's side of the family, so the O'Neills, which is why I came here last year. And I stayed with Declan last year at New Park, which was fantastic, with his amazing library and also his hints, and he was able to provide me with information that I didn't have before, and he also introduced me to Jane. So working with Jane last year, and Jane's been doing quite a lot of research because, you know, unless you're in the area and you know people, and meeting Joe Littleton has been amazing, you know, so, and being out and walking on his farm and then, so, you know, making these sort of connections with people is really, I think, how you find a lot of the stories that aren't in, you know, the official records. And as you know, in Ireland, there aren't a lot of official records. So it's trying to put these little pieces together to try and see, you know, who those O'Neills were and who they might have been related to. So, you know, O'Neill is the male line, McNamara is the female line. So if anybody knows anybody, you know, that might be related to me, very happy to talk to you.
So
Well, Jane would be able to help more than me.
Is it the Quinn area?
It's
In the
Queen
Queen.
Newmarket, yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of leads there, so yeah,
Yeah.
anyway. So yeah, thanks everyone for, oh, you have one more, Liam.
Thank
Okay.
you. Oh, one more.
I suppose feel free to say mind your own business, but when you were 19 and your father, did he write separately to your mother and you, or just
No,
one letter?
One letter.
And the letter was addressed to who? To you or her?
To both of us. And he sent that to my aunt, my Auntie Betty, that I was named after, and she had lived in the same place for years and years.
And did you? I mean, you had a decision to take.
Yes.
Then, and was that? Did you instinctively say yes, or did you think about it, or did you? It was,
No.
How did you? Do you know, after 19 years, what was your thoughts on it? And that's the part you can say, mind your own business. I
No,
suppose,
no.
you know.
I immediately I wanted to meet him.
Yeah,
I wanted.
yeah.
Who was this man? And I was expecting, you know, that I would meet this man who was my father, and that he'd be, you know, I'd feel this instant connection with him, and it'd be like a Disney movie, but it wasn't. It wasn't at all. So I didn't feel any connection with him when I actually met him, and yeah. And then it was a bit of a difficult time after that. Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, listen, thank you very much for coming. We had a very spirited and interesting discussion this evening. Now, our next event is a book launch on the 5th of December. That is the High Street and Parnell Street neighborhood. It's a fantastic book. Anybody who's an Ennis native now, from the blow-in that got a copy of it and has read it, it's really phenomenal. Lots of, Lucille Ellis. So there is mass on at 7:30 in the cathedral, and then the book launch will take place around 8:15 at the Maria Assumpta Hall. It's right next to the cathedral there, and you're all welcome to come in, purchase the book. I think the book will be for sale. Will it be for sale in Ennis Bookshop and Heaslip's? O'Connor's. So O'Connor's, Heaslip's, and Ennis Bookshop. 20 euros, yeah. Full of pictures, lots of family surnames associated with buildings. Very, very interesting. A great piece of work. Fantastic work that's been done. That's on the 5th of December. And then we will have our next meeting in January. And I'm not sure of that date. I want to say the 20th or 21st. It's the third Thursday in January here at 7:30. And we will have Joe Quealy, well-known North Clare local historian, who will be coming to speak that night to us. Okay? So thank you very much for coming. Just a quick reminder about the membership fees or dues that are due if you haven't paid them. And if we don't see you, have a lovely Christmas and New Year, and we'll see you in January. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Good night.